Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Would love to know who you are, where you're from. We'll utilize the chat box as always for these webinars that we do twice a month, Connecting to Admired Leadership. I'm very excited for our topic under discussion today. Oh, my man Grant from Indianapolis is with us today. He wins the award for first one in the chat box. So yeah, who are you? Where are you from? Would love to know that in the chat box. The topic for today, I was going to introduce right off the bat, create the ingredients of a compelling vision. And I was just articulating, I am down here at Trilith Studios, which is just an unbelievable place. They film a lot of Marvel movies here. It's a little town, all kinds of studios going on. My son, who's going to be entering into film production as his major here in a couple years, doing a 2-week camp down here. And I told him at the beginning of the week, I said, I want you to collect and write down and journal so you have a vision for what a career looks like in this. So we talk about visions with organizations and companies. Our firm knows real well. I use a lot of our leadership principles, a lot of our behaviors and best practices for my family and for my kids. So I'm very excited to grab some tidbits today along the way. But first off, Carolynne, you've been with us before, but tell us, who are you? What are you loving? What are you loving about what you get to do right now? Yeah.
Well, I love how you say that, Wes. So hi, everyone. Carolynne Thomas. I'm a partner at the firm. I sort of straddle all of the practices that we have when it comes to leadership coaching and strategic organizational communication. And love today's topic because I spend, I don't know, maybe a third of my time, depending on how you frame it, thinking through how do you mobilize an organization around a vision and strategy. And how do you do that in a way that, mobilize is really the right word, that people hear this vision and strategy, they believe it, and they know what to do about it, and they want to do something about it. So, and I love that work because the challenge is that a lot of times, some of us who are in large organizations in particular, but even some nonprofits and some other smaller organizations, we're getting advice from people who are really good at the development of and the mechanics of a vision and strategy. They're good at figuring out where should we go and how should we get there. But they're not good at figuring out how to articulate it.
Yeah.
So they take what they created as the plan and they're like, well, everybody needs to know this. It's like, actually, they don't need to know that. They need to know maybe a higher version of it, higher level version of it. So that's where we come in. And I love doing that work because it just can be so impactful for organizations.
And you mentioned something as to why you are uniquely positioned in some ways to speak to this. And so I want to articulate that a little bit. So those of you who might be new to our firm or to these webinars, we have really 3 practices within CRA Admired Leadership: strategic communications arm, a leadership arm, and a talent practice. And Carolynne works a great deal in both the leadership and strategic communications. And there may not be any other topic out there that requires both the best practices and behaviors of the world's most admired leaders to inspire, motivate, and the best practices of communications to actually mobilize in that way. So it's really great to have you talking about this today. We sent everyone, and Sophie, if you could drop in the chat box that field note that's under discussion, that we have under discussion today. So we sent everyone ahead of time the ingredients of a compelling vision field note. And if you're not subscriber to our field notes, highly recommend those daily emails, those great just best practice practical emails that go out each and every day. Could you walk us through kind of the pieces of that are in the field notes, maybe even the four key ingredients that are outlined, the purpose, vivid imagery, and all the emotional connection. There's a lot in there. So that, if you could kind of just unpack that field note for us a little bit.
Sure. And I'm going to just back up for 1 second before I do that too, and talk about just company messaging to start with. Because I think because a vision is really it's a message, right? It's a goal, it's a message, it answers a question of where are we going. And the field note talks a little bit about this in the first ingredient of a compelling vision. But the thing about it is what we try to do is help organizations create a message set that answers a series of questions. And the first one is, why do we exist? Like, why are we here in the first place? And that in some organizations, they call it a mission. In some organizations, they call it a purpose. I don't really care what you call it, as long as you can answer that question of why do we exist? And some people look at that very practically and say, well, we exist to, some people will say create shareholder value. It's like, well, again, is that compelling? I don't know if that's like, if you're a large shareholder, it is.
If you're a
Um,
shareholder, it's very compelling.
but if you're not, you're like, okay, so I'm here to make money for other people. I'm not I'm not sure I'm gonna, jump out of bed in the morning for that. But either way, but aside from that, first question is why do we exist? Second is where are we going, which is the vision. Third is how will we get there, wherever we're headed, and that's typically what we call a strategy. And then what are we doing right now, which is a set of initiatives. And finally, how will we know we've arrived, which is metrics. Okay, so we kind of think of this as a bit of a layer cake in that ideally the messages all are connected and they flow from one another, starting with that, why do we exist in the first place? So the vision, ideally is connected to a purpose. It's connected to why are we here in the first place? Why do we exist? And and that purpose is strong in the organization. And every organization is slightly different when it comes to that, and how strong it is. But ideally, there's something that does make me want to jump out of bed in the morning, or just, it makes me feel good about the work that I do. So that's the first piece. Is there a strong sense of purpose, messaging wise? And then secondly, is it we talk about vividness because we want people to be able to imagine. We want people to be able to imagine that destination and where we're headed. So if that's what the purpose of the vision is, how do we get there or where are we going? We want people to be able to imagine it and see it. And vividness is important to be able to do that. So, we're word nerds when we think about these things and try to create some rather than just say, and this wouldn't be compelling anyway, but rather than just say good, we would say fantastic. Or
Mm,
if we want to say, you know, we want to be, there's one of our clients, they had a vision and strategy that was, we want to be a great place for great people to do great work, um, which was, it was vivid for folks. They got that.
mhm,
And great may not be at the highest order of best, right? But being able to think about it that way was very resonant with the organization. Um, and then third, it has to be credible. And that's, I think, where sometimes people get a little off track, is they will think of a vision as something that is, we want to shoot the moon. We want to be, the most amazing company in the universe. And that's just not credible for
mhm,
most of your team members. And so you have to prevent the eye rolls from happening
mhm,
when you create your vision. So you have to create this balance of being vivid and having a strong sense of purpose with credibility. And so, not to be a wet blanket, but you want to have something that's right in the middle. And key to all of this is the last ingredient, which is resonance. So, we get a chance to go into lots of organizations and realize that organizations talk about a lot of the same things, but they use different language to describe them.
mhm,
And so the question is, as you're crafting your vision, is it using language that is resonant with your employees? Because if you
mhm,
miss the mark on that, people won't hear the vision. It'll
mhm,
like go right past them or kind of bounce off them. So you have to be really mindful of using language that does resonate with your team members. So an easy example for me is, as Wes knows, I do a lot of work in healthcare and have also spent a lot of time in faith-based healthcare. Well, a faith-based healthcare organization, is in health, they're in the same industry as a for-profit health system, but they talk very differently,
Yep.
very, very differently. And so we joke sometimes about, if you walked into a faith-based health system and said, I want to beat the competition down the road, chances are the mission leader would probably kick you out of the hospital. So, but you can say, we want to be the best and be the place where people come for care.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing, right? Just using different language. So we're always thinking a lot about how do you have that strong sense of purpose? How do you make sure you're using vivid language so people can imagine it and see it, but
Mhm.
also it's credible? And then finally, ensuring that you've got some resonant language in there.
That's great. So I know many on the call right now, or perhaps they're running and listening to the recording down the road too. They're stopping and they're trying to take notes, or they're rapidly taking notes on all these questions and things. Just want to make sure everybody knows everyone who registers gets the recording afterwards, and you can also see any previous topics for all these webinars too. In fact, if I could have Sophie, she'll drop that in the chat box for us. So here in just a couple days, you'll be able to listen to this recording, and so you can stop, pause, rewind, all those kind of things as well. Because Carolyn, you just said some pretty phenomenal. I mean, just that list of questions that you could ask yourself as an organization when you're trying to get after the why do we exist, piece is pretty phenomenal. Just you've mentioned some, but talk specifically, what are some standard approaches that are in the marketplace today related to creating a compelling vision that you've seen? And what have we found from a practical high utility side that might be a little lesser known? And I know that's a broad question, but I always love to bring that up with any topic because that's really where we play, the real preeminent place in the very saturated leadership communication sandbox that's out there in the market. There's some common strategies that are used on different topics, and then there's some things that we can just pick up on along the way too. So, what comes to mind when you think of what's out there related to vision preparation that's standard that most people know versus what we've discovered and that seem to be best practices?
Yeah, so what we find is that a lot of organizations, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, they will use a strategic planning process to create their vision,
Mhm.
and which is a great place to start. They will, they have to figure out like where are you going? Like where do you want to go as a company? Now, if you ask different uh, experts in this space, some will say, well, going after a 5 or 10 year vision right now is maybe a little foolhardy given the way the world works now. Maybe a little,
Sorry for anyone who's currently in knee deep in a 5 to 10 year strategic
I
planning
mean,
process, but
we
it's the truth. It's the absolute truth.
yeah,
Yep.
I mean, my favorite quote is by the great leadership guru, Mike Tyson. And he said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I I think that yeah, it's challenging. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna have for breakfast tomorrow, let alone what I'm gonna do in 3 years. So, but either way, um, I need to get back on track. But we start with a strategic planning process, and whether it's 2 years, it's 5 years, whatever it might be, we try to figure out like what ultimately is our unique market position,
Mhm.
and how are we going to get there, and what's the destination we're trying to get to. So, and that's very standard. Now, the challenge with that is everyone becomes very wed to the language they use through
Yep.
that process.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it's incredibly difficult to undo the language that ends up in the final documentation of that vision and strategy once it's baked.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this all the time, and half the time people take it seriously and they say, okay, and I'll get to that in a second. And the other half, they say, oh no, we'll be able to smooth it over at the end. And it just does not happen. And so we
Yeah.
are stuck with a lot of clunky management speak
Mm-hmm.
that is not vivid, it isn't resonant, and
Yeah.
all the things. So what we encourage is that as you're developing the content and really developing the strategy and the vision and the plan, to involve somebody who will ultimately be the one that's responsible for communicating it at the end. And
Yeah.
maybe that is the senior leaders, or maybe that is there's a communication leader. It depends on the size of the organization. If you
Mhm.
don't have somebody who thinks really deeply about this, what I would encourage everyone to do is just take a 2 hour, have somebody come in for 2 hours and talk about what really strong vision and strategy communication looks like
Yeah.
educate the team so that as they're going through the process, they can hold each other accountable to it.
Yeah.
Because that's actually happened. We did this with a one of our international pharmaceutical clients. I flew to Europe and I spent a day with their leadership team, and I told them, I said, look, here's what really great looks like, and here are the things you need to watch out for. And the other thing that you need to watch out for that isn't part of crafting the vision, but it's part of communicating it, is that you will get bored.
Mm.
The leaders will end up spending, sometimes 6 months developing their vision and strategy. And then once you're ready to communicate it, they're ready to move on because they've been talking about it for 6 months.
Yeah.
And when we use the analogy, it's because the song is in their head and it's not in anyone else's head yet. And so they're sick of hearing the same song in their head when no one else has started singing it.
Yeah.
And so and that's exactly, and it was great because what happened is 6 months later, I had one of their leaders call and say, thank goodness, because we tried to start changing the language and we all were tired of talking about it.
Yeah.
And thank God we all were able to hold each other accountable because of what you shared with us. So, no matter what it is, I think if you don't have somebody who's planning to be the communication person, just educate the leadership team up front so you can hold
Mhm.
each other accountable, or make sure you're involving somebody who can help.
So I'd love for everybody to be able to pick your brain a little bit as we move deeper into that space, really almost executing the strategic plan. And so a lot of times in organizations, I feel like there's the strategic plan. And I loved how you said too, Carolyn, I think this is a great takeaway for everybody. If you're enter into a strategic plan, some of those questions that Carolyn mentioned at the beginning are great to cross-reference to what's coming out of that strategic plan because most strategic planning processes, the outcomes of those are actually against creating something that's vivid and inspirational. There's much more management talk in them and those kind of things. So cross-referencing towards those questions, just that in and of itself can be a phenomenal takeaway. But as you get into execution, a lot of times there's the development of the strategic plan, and then we're executing on that strategic plan. And there's a huge piece in there that really I've learned from people like you and others in our strategic communications arm of our firm how important it is to be very intentional about how you communicate when that happens. So there's a lot of pieces with that related to buy-in, if there's change of scope, the people who have been knee deep, as you mentioned, in the development of it are getting bored of it already by the time it starts rolling out at that point. What are some best practices, things that you've seen with our clients that we've worked with related to communicating the vision, communicating the plan?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we tell people is, and I think this was a quote from the founder of FedEx. I always get his name confused with Mr. Rogers, but Fred, I think his first name was. Uh, he said, you got to keep the main thing the main thing.
Mhm.
And so we talk about that a lot because inside of organizations, when you're thinking about what you're communicating, the main thing should be your vision and strategy. And everything that you're communicating and broadcasting across the organization, whether it's in town hall meetings, it's in all hands meetings, it's in staff meetings, like everything should connect back to the main thing, the vision and strategy. So that's the first piece. And if you can get leaders to appreciate that, it's tremendously important and helpful. Second thing is you need to look for signals that you're not serious about your vision and strategy. So this is another area where I use the eye roll test and say, like, when you communicate that vision and strategy, what are all the things that are going to make people roll their eyes?
Mhm.
Whatever those things are, you either need to eliminate them, change them, and publicly change them. Not just like, they disappear under the cover of night, but you need to say to people, this is no longer in line with our vision and strategy, so we're actually going to change it. Or you need to explain why you can't.
Mhm.
Because if you don't do that, then, the challenge is people will believe what you do before what you say.
Mhm.
And so if there's all sorts of signals that are counter to your vision, they're going to believe what their experience is. They're not going to believe the words. So that's a second piece. And then, you just have to make sure that you're equipping leaders, not just the executive team, but really anybody who's a leader in the organization to say, this is what this means for us and our team.
Yeah.
And then finally, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, but you need to just keep it alive over time. Like it needs to remain the foundation, and people they're sort of always looking over their shoulder to say, like, has this changed? Like, am I supposed to keep going? Am I heading in the right direction? Because if you communicate it once and then you just, wait until the next year to communicate it, people aren't going
Mhm.
to be sure. And so you may not actually achieve the vision because people don't have the clarity that they need.
Yeah. That's one common thread that I feel like comes up in a lot of these webinars, regardless of the topic. And that thread is it's great to communicate even when there's no change. Just continue to communicate. We're staying the course. This is going well, even when there's no change along the way. That piece seems really important as it relates to all this. Also, real quick, we're happy to take any questions in the chat box if you have any kind of specific examples there, those kind of things. And then I want to tee you up with the next question, but did you have any? It looked like you might have something else to say. Okay.
Okay.
Let me tee you up with the next question. What I'd love to hear is any really great impact stories or case studies related to any clients that we've worked with or just any clients that we've seen, because we love, even if we're not working with organizations, we love seeing things roll out really, really well. Any specific, very compelling vision-oriented communication pieces that come to mind? So let me tee you up with that and see if you have one. While we're doing that, we've had the best time having quick 10-minute coaching conversations with folks. So, for those of you who attend live, who are on here now, Sophie's going to drop that, already did, in the chat box there. If you want 10 minutes to talk about vision and vision creation and some of these questions and those kind of things, just click that link and you can sign up for that 10-minute coaching session. Those have been so much fun, and we're finding folks finding those very valuable too. So, all right, with that, Carolyn, any specific case studies, impact stories come to mind related to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So I'm going to focus on one just because the message is very easy for me to rattle off. A number of years ago, I think it was maybe even 2002-ish, we were working with a large, primarily US based national company, although they did have international operations too. And we were working with their CEO and their COO, and we were working exactly through this. Like they were articulating a new vision and strategy for the organization. And I pair those two things because I think it's, vision by itself without the how is sometimes lacking for your team members. And so, I'm always trying to figure out how do we pair them because what ultimately we're trying to explain is where are we going and how are we going to get there and include the why in it. So that's
Yeah.
also how you include the purpose. So where we landed with them was they wanted to be and I mentioned this earlier, a great place for great people to do great work. That was the vision. And they had metrics that were associated with that. And to do that, they were going to do four things. They were going to build the team, satisfy the customer, work smarter, not harder, and deliver the family of businesses. Those were the four areas. And while for some people they may think, well, those are pretty broad. They were intentionally broad for reasons that we can get into at another point when we talk about how do you communicate strategy. And we spent, a good length of time drafting the message and then having a series of cascading conversations. They had 10 business units that were all different hospitality and tourism verticals. So they had hotels and restaurants, and we were able to take that message and translate it for all of them and communicate it through every one of those verticals. So fast forward 10 years, and I think it was almost exactly 10 years. And I had somebody who I had not talked to for a very long time. His name shows up on my phone. And I was like, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" And he said, "Do you remember?" And he rattled it off. He said, "Do you remember a great place for great people to do great work?" And then he rattled off the four things. And I said, "Well, of course I do." And he's like, "I'm at a new organization and we need that here."
Wow.
He had gone someplace else in the middle. He had then landed at a new, very large organization. And I was sort of shocked that
Mhm.
he could remember it in that way. And so I think it's just so powerful. It's so powerful to be able to, now you don't want people who are just like, memorizing thing in the Stepford Wives, but because of the ingredients that we share in that field note, and because of just the process that we were able to go through, it worked and it stuck and it made a big difference. So that was it's, I remember it to this day. And that was actually 10 years ago from now. So long time ago.
All right, we got some really great topics still to come for the rest of this year. I'm going to have Sophie again drop in the chat box where you can see those if you're not familiar with other webinars that we have coming up, some really great topics. I want to articulate just one thing that kind of came to mind and bookend our webinar just a little bit, and then Carolyn, give you any kind of final thoughts or encouragement that you might have for the leaders listening in live or on the recording here, perhaps over the weekend. But I think what comes to mind is the idea of self-efficacy and organizational efficacy. So the original story I shared at the beginning of the week, I want my son this week to get a clear, concise, compelling, courageous vision of his future. I want him to be able to paint it so vividly that it stirs intrinsic motivation in him to do something about it in the present. What do I need to do right now so that that vision can actually become, what it is? That is a construct in people. It's a construct in my children. It's a construct in our staff that we'd really love. Would it be also correlated to organizational efficacy, a very clear, concise, compelling, courageous vision of the future that stirs intrinsic motivation in people to get after it, right? And do something about it so it becomes fully realized. We often have strategic plans and then we attach extrinsic motivators to get everybody to do it rather than clearly having them vision cast that. Could you just kind of speak to that in the last 3 minutes, any way, shape, or form, or just any advice you would have for people to create that kind of a culture within their organization where that efficacy is out there and there's such a vision for the future that everybody, is excited about it. So tell everybody exactly how they can get everybody in their organization so excited about their vision. 2 minutes here.
Well, I do think the a mental checklist. There's a mental checklist for how you develop strong vision and strategy messages, and one of them is it has got to be actionable for people. So I know that's not necessarily exactly where you're going with the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but I think that is one mistake that a lot of organizations make is they end up articulating something that your average team member can't do anything about.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, you have to start with, can they do something about it?
Mhm.
And then are they motivated to do something with it?
Yep. That's right.
And I got to tell you, Wes, I've drunk the Kool-Aid, and it's so hard for me to not, when I think about this, think of, this is about motivating and inspiring your team, and that's about leadership.
Yep.
That is about leaders who have built a relationship with their team members and who can take the vision and say, this is what it means for us. And those team members say, you know what? I'm going to charge up the hill, not only for this leader, but also for myself.
Mhm.
So, that's not where you're going necessarily, I don't think, but like I'm just such a huge believer in the idea of fanness and um, the relational connection that leaders have with their team members and what that can spark and the fire that can build inside of your team.
Mm. I am unbelievably fired up. I'm going to have to go for a run after this now to get all the adrenaline out that I have for this particular topic. No, this has been great. And again, we'll leave the chat box open here for just a bit if you want to schedule one of those meetings to have some conversation around the vision in your organization, or perhaps you're like me and you need your son or daughter or somebody within your life to kind of cast that vision to. Carolyn, as always, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. To everyone else, have a fantastic weekend and just a great time engaging in some of these things that we've talked about today. We'll see you in the next one, everybody. Bye.
Appreciate it, Wes. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Carolyn. Bye.